You're listening to Synergy to Synastry, the podcast where two corporate girlies called to follow their intuition take you on a journey of self-exploration through metaphysical modalities.
I'm Christine, intuitive coach and clairvoyant.
And I'm Renee, psychic intuitive and astrologer.
We're excited that you're here and honored to be your spiritual guides. If you enjoy this podcast, make sure to subscribe, rate, and review wherever you listen. It helps listeners find our show, plus it automatically enters you into our raffles to win a free psychic reading.
Now, let's get into the episode.
I feel like the Michael Scott meme from The Office where he's looking around like, it's happening! I am so excited to announce we have arrived at our third and final cultural mini-series of Season 3. This one is a long time in the making. I read multiple books for this. Omega did a ton of research on a lot of articles, and then I did some additional research. There was a lot that went into this series. I discovered very, very quickly that there are a ton of intersections with both the Greek and Roman lore, which I was not expecting. I thought going into this season that Celtic lore was going to be fully an outlier, and wow, was I wrong. This is why we trust our guides, because this really is the perfect ending to this season. And before we start, I did my due diligence. I think this is the first time I've ever done this, but I sat down and I looked up every single Celtic, Gaelic, Irish word to figure out the pronunciation so that I'm prepared and don't have to do what I normally do, which is pause, look it up, and then come back in. So I have all of my notes ready. There's a lot of words. And hopefully I can stick the landing on the first run, and I've made my notes clear enough. As I've done with all of our part 1 episodes of these lore mini-series, I've looked to place us in time. And this one was old. This is very old, but then in other ways overlapping with the other 2 series. In order to grasp the actual culture here, we need to first figure out who we're talking about. Because unlike the other 2 cultures, they're very straightforward. Greece is a country. Italy is a country, formerly Roman Empire. These are much easier to track historically, and there's significantly more documentation. Whereas when we're talking about the Celtics, this is more of a multinational, nomadic, and organically spread phenomena, movement, culture. There was no fixed doctrine or unified belief system here. There are multiple classifications of people within the ranks, if you will, but you could have your own practices, rituals, focusing on certain deities versus others, or none at all, focusing on places or even natural elements in general. Personal experiences and choice are central, and the exploration in and of itself is a way of establishing a connection with who you are. The oldest evidence of the Druids is 3200 BCE in petroglyphs, meaning images that were carved oftentimes in rocks or caves. Otherwise, the majority of Celtic lore was passed through oral tradition or potentially lost entirely. It wasn't until the Druids officially came on the scene that they started to really document and create scripts based on the trees and their magical properties in a body of spiritual work known as the Ogham. I mentioned earlier that the Celtics and subsequently the Druids and other types of people, which I will talk about in a future episode, were seen as a force to be reckoned with throughout Europe. The Greeks called them the Keltoi. Kel means to strike, in other words, implying that they're fighters. while the Romans called them the Gauls, from Galli, meaning subservient. And there is a lot of tense history and rivalry between the Celts and the Romans. The Roman Empire was seeking to conquer as much of Europe, obviously, as possible. And there are several periods of documented battles, huge face-offs between these two, again, not nations. One's an empire and one is just kind of a group that's spreading and existing. It's really interesting to compare them because they were not the same and yet were seen as so influential and a challenger to the Roman way of life, which we talked about in the last miniseries. We can look back to 500 BCE, where the Celts' presence was documented in Germany. 400 BCE, where they were taking hold in Spain, Italy, the Balkans, and Northern Europe. And as you can see, this feels like a threat. We're now fully in the time period that we were talking about for both the Greek and Roman eras. And in 390 BCE, the Celts had, quote, sacked Rome, as well as again in 280 BCE. Plus, the Greeks were not spared. They desecrated the temple at Delphi. This was, in some ways, an aggressive group, a dominant group. But as you will hear more, they weren't just bold fighters. They were very attuned to nature, peace, compassion. Similar to the Greeks and Romans, they were viewed as polytheistic. And I'll go through just a subset of some gods and goddesses in Celtic lore. To start, we have the larger umbrella of the Tua de Danann, which means the children of the goddess Danu. This family wielded 4 treasures, and it was believed that many of the divine beings descended directly from this family. Now we have to talk about who Danu is first. She is considered the mother goddess and goddess of fertility. She's associated with fish, wells, seagulls, and flowing water. As a side note here, I do love and appreciate how there is some sort of mother goddess in every single one of these cultures. And this type of divine being is not uncommon across way more than just these 3. So let's give it up for the ladies. Next we have Dagda, who was the god of earth. The visual that I picture for him is the Emperor card in tarot. In the seat of power, grounded, strong, confident. He's associated with the club. I saw the picture of this little drawing and rendering, and all it made me think of was Lucille in The Walking Dead. Not that it actually had barbed wire around it, but there were some spikes on the top. And I was like, was this based on that? I'll have to look that up for our modernity episode. And he's also associated with the cauldron, which we will talk about more later in this series. Next, we have Morgan, who's partners with Dagda, and she is the goddess of water and fate. Now we move on to probably the most famous one. I have actually heard this name before, and there is a reason for that. There's 2 different pronunciations that I found. The Irish version is Bríd, and the English version is Brigid. And she is the daughter of Dagda and Morgan. And Brigid is the goddess of the fire and hearth. Sounds a lot like Vesta, right? But also included are art, prophecy, and healing. Now, her lore in particular is so impactful because she actually was adopted. There's a crossover here with the Roman lore because there is a Saint Brigid. And this is one of the many examples of the cultural impact on each other, all of these different communities blending. She was such a strong and central figure that she ended up getting co-opted woven into the Roman Empire influence. Next, we have Angus, who is the god of love and summer. He's like a combination of Cupid or Eros for the love side, and then Aestus or Theros representing summer. And Angus had shape-shifted into a swan to be with his love who had been cursed into bird form. More on swans later this episode. And lastly, we have Cernunnos, who is the god of animals, flora, and abundance. And he was depicted as being horned. And you know what that meant? He was especially vilified by the Christian movement because you're seeing the horns and thinking, dun, 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 this god or goddess is horrible, but just think about what he was representing. He may have been horned simply to represent the connection with the animals and nature. Cernunnos is representing one of the many figures and catalysts, points of rejection for the Roman Empire looking to wipe out competing spheres of influence. Now, before we get into decoding some of the symbols I've plugged already, I wanted to sidebar into one of the most famous figures from Celtic lore. The story of King Arthur goes that whoever pulls this sword from the stone is the rightful king of Britain. Many knights and nobles tried and failed, but then a young boy easily removes the sword from the stone. In this tale, we have Merlin, a powerful wizard with prophetic abilities, who helped him discover his true identity. Arthur later creates the Round Table, where all of the knights were considered equal. Many search for the Holy Grail, a sacred cup believed to grant spiritual wisdom and eternal life. Queen Guinevere fell in love with Sir Lancelot. All really notable, prominent figures. There have been many, many retellings of all of these stories, and I want to dive more into the symbolism. But there was also, very notable, the quote end of King Arthur's tale. And it was that his son, Mordred, rebelled against him. There was a battle, and he was able to defeat his son, but in turn was mortally wounded. He was taken to a magical island of Avalon, where legend says he sleeps until Britain needs him again. So picking apart this story just a little bit more, I wanted to highlight some really key Celtic principles. Intuition is appearing with Merlin, the innate abilities and gifts. The Round Table, where knights were considered equal, that is also of significance for this culture. In the books that I was reading, they kept repeating over and over again how men and women were not treated differently based on a rank. It was very communal, wanting everyone to come together and creating balance. So that's where we have the connection with nature, all beings of nature. The Holy Grail, of course, we have the Ace of Cups in tarot, and across many cultures, there's a similar idea. Well, if you just reach this, it's like Nuurvana. You reach that and you get that wisdom and you can live forever. You can spiritually up-level. And finally, the dynamics of love and also battle are very, very common throughout the Celtic lore stories. Now let's talk about some more symbols here. Ones that stood out for me, the number 3, this comes up a lot. 3 parts, things in trios, sequences, shapes, visuals coming in 3s. For example, we have the Holy Trinity, strength, eternal love, and unity, which contrasts but overlaps, connects to Christianity and some of the Roman lore that we talked about. That Holy Trinity is the Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. In essence, the one-to-one that we have is strength is the Father, eternal love is the Son, and unity is the Holy Spirit. which archetypally we can see how that would make sense, that there is crossover, there is a blending of these cultures during this time, but the representation, the visuals, and the practices, of course, were very different. Other symbols that you'll see in Celtic lore are lots of circles. Everywhere, lots and lots of circles. We'll talk more about that, including in Celtic knots. These are incredibly famous. You've probably seen a variety of different symbols. They have circles, they have swirls, the intricate weaving of the lines together where it almost looks like it's infinity. You can't find exactly where all of the lines are going. There are many instances where this type of imagery was actually infused into Christian documentation. Pretty much above all, I've mentioned this a few times, but nature is so incredibly important and foundational. One of those being birds. This comes up a lot. I'll go through a few examples now of some birds with their corresponding meanings. We have ravens that represent war and prophecy. Cranes, signifying goddesses and the supernatural world. Swans, which reflect beauty, purity, and love. I want to sidebar here because there are many, many Celtic stories featuring people getting turned into swans. I couldn't believe it. I was like, there's another one? I thought I was mixing them up, but I was not. They were all different stories. People getting turned into swans or turning themselves into swans. The Angus example earlier, that is just one of many. And in his case, think about it. He was becoming the swan, which represents love, in order to be with the love of his life. And this may still be true, but I was seeing in reports that it is illegal to hunt or kill a swan because they are so revered. Last bird I want to talk about, owls. I think this is the third time I've discussed owls just this season, so this has been coming up increasingly all over the place. Looking back at some etymology here, we have the Scottish Gaelic cailleach, which means old woman. An owl in Gaelic is cailleach ihia, which means an old woman of the night. Owls in Celtic lore were associated with the crone. This is another really significant trio, the maven, mother, and crone, also known as the triple goddess concept. So this crone, the old woman, is wise, and therefore the owl was believed to provide wisdom, specifically by unmasking people trying to deceive or take advantage of you. Owls in Celtic lore are also depicted as guiding people to and through the underworld. Think about it like this. They got really good eyesight, so that'll help. I think in reading about this interpretation and historical framework for owls, it does line up a bit with how I've used my Athena Greek owl, which is currently perched on my dresser in my, I guess you call it altar area, but it's where I keep my oracle and tarot cards. And when I draw for the day, I lay all of them out. And so for probably at least the last month, I've had my little Athena owl perched and sitting there facing my cards. And sometimes I'll be drawn to place it on individual cards, which then I try to look into at the end of the day. Why did I do that? Was that one especially significant? Was there wisdom in particular coming from that? Not only is this owl representing Athena in Greek lore, wisdom, smarts, strategy, but honesty, clarity. In some ways, the guides themselves, your supportive team of spirit guides there to direct you through the darkness that is life, that is spiritual awakenings, challenges, and helping you see your way through the chaos to find the light. I am very much looking forward to talking about the next piece here. You can't discuss Celtic lore without talking trees. The Celtics believed that trees could carry wisdom and also communicate with each other. And I was seeing that scientists have determined that trees can actually share water through the roots. So if one of them has received a little bit of extra water, there's a tree nearby that's a little parched, a little too much sun, and it can pass some of the water through those tiny, tiny roots underground and share, which is so cool. So the Celtics were right. And I have to do a callback here before I go into all of the sacred trees. We have to revisit book club. When I discussed placing rocks at the base of a tree in my yard as a kid, my mind was honestly blown when I started doing the Celtic research, because I was like, why did this random memory come through when I was reading this chapter? All of a sudden, I recognize exactly why it came to the surface, because this is so Celtic. It's like, okay, no wonder I have in my astrocartography chart some past life lines going through this general region, as well as had on this podcast and in other dreams and past life sessions, the insight dropped in that I have past life connections to Scotland, and I have literal ancestry to Ireland. So if we're talking about this general region, I already know I have some of it. But to trace back these thousands of years to this community, I was like, oh my gosh, I was a child and I didn't know what I was doing, but I was doing something that is so Celtic, I was gagged. So there's a few things here. I was stacking rocks and putting them at the base of a tree.
Back in the Roman Lore Updates episode, my mom believed it to be an oak tree. I have heard it also could have been a maple tree. So either or, I'm going to explain definitions for both. So for the maple tree,
it's abundance, divination, grounding, love, and wisdom. And can't we use a little bit of all of that?
Now, if it was in fact an oak, as my mom suspected, and as I had initially thought it was, hello, that's the most sacred of all trees! According to the Celtics, oak trees are associated with Zeus, as well as the planet Jupiter. So we're covering both the Greek and Roman side in understanding this tree. And it was a symbol of the divine, spiritual truth. The Celtic word for oak is dor. In other words, the oak tree was a doorway to higher knowledge and divine power.
Rocks, or stones, symbolized a connection between the physical and spiritual realm. A practice of stacking stones was not uncommon and viewed as an offering. And if you're making an offering to and at a tree, which is the most sacred, I mean, I just, I was like, this is crazy. This is crazy that I did it for whatever short period of time. It's like I understood them. Oh, the rocks don't come in the house. But I was identifying what felt special and that the tree was special and that I had to put them there. So it just completely is brain shattering to have forgotten that I did this, have it come up the timing that it did just before I was doing this research, to then realize this connection. Looking at the sacred seven. So yeah, there's more than three. Remember how there were 7 sacraments? So I kept, as I was reading, finding all of these little connections. I'm like, what do you mean there's 7 sacred trees after we just did a culture talking about 7 sacraments? Why is the repetition? History rhymes. So these 7 trees were the oak, that's the number 1. That's the top, the pinnacle. And we also have the ash tree, apple, haze, as in Haze, alder, not to be confused with elder, which is number 6, and yew, Y-E-W. Not only were trees an integral part of everyday life, they were worshipped, they were connected to for wisdom and divination, more on that in part 3, but they were integrated into a whole other astrological system and framework. If you look up Celtic tree astrology, you'll see that the lunar calendar associates each of the 13 moon cycles with a sacred tree. The list is longer than the 7 that I just said, but those are all included. This is all based off of the dates that you were born. I'll include a link in the show notes and you'll see it's very, very simple. You look for one of 13 segments of the year during which your birthday falls. And that's how you get your tree. For Christine, she has the vine. And what this means is that she seeks beauty in all forms, aspires to grow, is naturally generous and appreciates luxury, is charming, elegant, hardworking, and sometimes conflict avoidant. I had the alder tree, which is one of the sacred 7, which got me pretty pumped. And the alder tree represents a natural born leader, someone who is driven, magnetic and warm, able to connect with a wide variety of personalities, has an inner strength and self-assuredness, is very time-oriented, and rejects inauthenticity. The way I laughed so hard. I can't disagree with any single word I just said about myself. That's completely spot on. And if you've listened to any of the book clubs, chapter 15 through 19, I was specifically going on and on talking about time. And I have said and observed about myself, I can be friends with most anyone, regardless of personality type. I can usually find some way to connect with people. And I have been told that people can be drawn to me and that I am very warm, or that when I speak, my speaking voice is warm. The whole natural born leader thing, being driven, it's so Aries coded, it's not even funny, which of course draws forth another question. These are all different divination tools. With the many, many forms of astrology, how are they overlapping with each other? If I'm looking at Christine's with the vine, Christine is a Virgo. But some of that definition sounds very, very Venusian, which would be more of the Taurus or Libra. The aspiring to grow, that's very Virgo. The elegance, the hardworking piece. So I can see how some of the traits overlap with the traditional Western astrology. Christine feels like a combination of Virgo and Taurus, where mine looks like Aries for sure, maybe even a little bit of Leo, and a splash of either Virgo or Capricorn, which I feel like is pretty accurate. Leave a comment. If you're an alder tree and we're buddies, let's be tree friends. And here's your reminder. In honor of the Celtics, maybe go hug a tree or sit in nature. I'm very, very excited to continue this series. We'll have part 2 coming out soon, Celtic Lore in Modernity. But coming up next in your feed will be the 7th installment of the Soul Rising Book Club, during which I'm going to be talking about chapters 24 through 26. So make sure to get to reading. And if this episode has inspired you to read more about Celtic lore, please do write in with what you've learned. And also let me know how I did on the pronunciation. If there's anyone out there that knows Gaelic or speaks Irish.
Thanks for listening. If you'd like to learn more, the resources we used to prepare for this episode are listed in the show notes.
If you're curious to develop your intuition, we've partnered with the Nuurvana Be Light program to give our listeners a $500 discount on tuition fees. Email us for more details and we'll connect you with the founder, Deganit Noor.
Want to connect with us? You can reach me, Christine, at Channeled by Christine with 1 L on Instagram.
And you can reach me, Renee, at _read by Renee, or connect with us both via email at synergytosynastry@gmail.com.
Keep your spirit curious and your aura sparkling.
We'll see you when the stars next align.
Is that even right? I feel like saying speaks Irish sounds wrong. I have to research this. I should know this. I feel like this is like a betrayal of my ancestry to not know. So Gaelic leans a little bit more Scottish. So that's our difference here. The Irish language is sometimes referred to as Walga, the name of the Irish language in Irish. Love an educational blooper. is cute. It's super cute. Chop, chop, choppity chop.